Picture this, it's the 1970s, deep in the forests of Tanzania. A brutal 4-year war breaks out. But this wasn't a human conflict. This was a war fought by chimpanzees. And what happened there would completely change our understanding of our closest living relatives, and maybe, just maybe, even ourselves.
That's a quote from the legendary Jane Goodall. For years, her research had painted this incredible picture of chimpanzees as, mostly peaceful, intelligent beings. We saw them use tools, we saw their complex family bonds. But this war, it just shattered that image. It forced Goodall, and really the entire scientific community, to confront a much darker and, frankly, a disturbingly familiar side of their nature.
And let's be clear, this was not just a few random fights. No, this was a calculated campaign of total extermination. One group systematically hunted down and killed the very chimps they had once groomed and played with, the ones they considered family. So the question that just hangs over all of this is, how on earth did it come to this?
To really get it, we have to rewind a little bit. Because before the war, they were all one community, the Kasakela. They shared the same territory, they looked out for each other. Everything seemed, on the surface at least, to be fine. But just beneath that surface, the social fabric was already starting to rip apart.
This breakdown didn't happen overnight. It was this slow 4-year slide into what they call a total schism. It started really subtly back in '71, with chimps just, preferring to hang out with certain friends over others. But by '72, that preference had soured into actual hostile encounters, and then, a year later, that was it. A line had been drawn in the sand, a literal no-man's land, and the two groups were now complete strangers living right next to each other.
So what was at the heart of this big split? Well, it was a classic power struggle. In the north, you had the big boss, Humphrey, a large, aggressive alpha. But down in the south, you had these two brothers, Hugh and Charlie, and they presented a united front. Now, one-on-one, Humphrey could probably take either of them, but together, they were fearless, and they basically carved out their own territory, which was a direct challenge to his rule.
But this rivalry, it was really just the spark. The whole situation was fueled by deeper issues. See, a polio epidemic in the 60s had already shaken up the community's power dynamics. Add to that a leadership vacuum, and then a real shortage of fertile females. It was a total pressure cooker. The competition for status, for mates, it was becoming dangerously intense.
So, with the community now officially split in two, all that simmering hostility was about to boil over into all-out war. The normal threats and chest-pounding displays were about to be replaced by something far more lethal, something far more organized.
January 7th, 1974. You're going to want to remember that date, because this is the day everything changed. It marks the very first recorded instance of chimpanzees deliberately hunting down and killing a former member of their own community. The war had officially begun.
And the first murder? It was just chillingly strategic. A Kasakela war party moved in complete silence, a tactic no one had ever seen before. They found their target, a chimp named Gotti, all by himself. They surrounded him, cut off any chance of escape, and then just launched this coordinated 10-minute assault. And after it was over, they celebrated. They retreated, hooting and dragging branches in this kind of victory display. This wasn't a fight, it was an execution.
And just like that, this became the new normal. The usual noisy, vibrant life of the forest was replaced by the eerie silence of these deadly patrols. The Kasakela males weren't just defending their territory anymore, they were actively hunting their former friends. The annihilation was just so methodical. Look at this. The leaders, Hugh and Charlie, they were taken out. The elderly, like Goliath and Madam B, were shown absolutely no mercy. This wasn't random at all. Year by year, the Kahama were systematically erased from existence until only one single male was left standing.
But here's where the story gets even more disturbing. The horror wasn't just confined to the war between these two groups. As the Kasakela were waging their campaign against the Kahama, their own society was starting to completely rot from the inside out.
Yeah, so within the victorious Kasakela community, a mother-daughter duo, get this, named Passion and Palm, began this horrific spree of cannibalistic infanticide. They would actually stalk other mothers, steal their babies, and then kill and eat them. This had nothing to do with rivalry or territory. This was a level of social breakdown that researchers had never, ever imagined was possible.
So, all of this leads to the one question that has pretty much haunted primatology ever since. What caused this? Was this savagery some kind of freak, one-off event? Or was this a horrifying glimpse into the true nature of chimpanzees?
The war finally came to an end with the death of Sniff, the very last Kahama male. And the final act was one of just visceral brutality. An attacker was seen actually cupping his hand to drink the blood from his victim's face. I mean, that single horrific image just captures the sheer intensity of the hatred that had developed between these former neighbors.
And this right here, this is the great debate. Did Jane Goodall and her team simply witness a natural, evolved behavior playing out? Or, and this is the tough part, did their very presence, their feeding stations, the shrinking habitat around the park, did they somehow cause this war?
Okay, so it basically boils down to three main schools of thought on this. The first theory is that the artificial feeding stations, where they left out bananas, created unnatural stress and competition. Another one points to broader human impacts, like deforestation. But the third, and maybe the most disturbing theory, argues that this is just what chimpanzees do, that war is an adaptive strategy, a brutal but effective way to gain resources. And in that view, humans didn't cause the war, we were just the first ones there to write it down.
The war officially ended in 1978 with the death of that last Kahama male. But the story doesn't end there, not at all. The conflict cast this long dark shadow over Gombe for decades to come.
So the Kasakela, they took over the Kahama's land, but it turned out to be what we call a Pyrrhic victory. See, by wiping out their southern neighbors, they had eliminated a crucial buffer zone, and now their new border was shared with a much larger, much more dangerous community. The prize they won in the war actually made them more vulnerable than ever before.
And it seems the violence just echoed through the generations. There was a chimp named Frodo, who was born during the war. He grew up in this culture of extreme aggression, and he became the biggest and most violent alpha Gombe had ever seen. It really suggests that this kind of behavior might even be, in a way, culturally transmitted.
So what did we learn from all of this? Well, the Gombe War gives us a chillingly clear playbook for conflict. It shows the strategic importance of alliances and of isolating your enemy. Every single victim was attacked when they were alone. It reveals that females play an active, not a passive role. But maybe the most important lesson here is the raw power of us versus them. As soon as the Kahama were mentally recategorized from neighbor to stranger, their slaughter became psychologically possible.
And that, of course, leaves us with the most unsettling question of all. When we look at the tribalism, the territoriality, and the organized violence of the Gombe War, are we just looking at apes, or are we actually seeing the deep evolutionary roots of humanity's own dark side reflected right back at us?